The year is 2017. Moonlight wins Best Picture, Flume tops the charts, and the Adelaide Football Club participate in a decade-defining choke, sending Richmond into football lore forever. Not only did they send away one of the strongest seasons in club history, but they tarnished their future and put themselves into a period of mass exodus from which to this day they have not emerged. But the main reason for why the club was sent into turmoil extends much further beyond the on-field performance. The story of the infamous 2018 pre-season collective mind camp and the subsequent cover-up and attempted lawsuit provides for fascinating reading. But to understand how they got to that point, we must travel through the mid-2010s, where Adelaide were building the strongest team the club had held since their premiership run in the late 90s. See, at the beginning of the 2015 season, the Crows, under Phil Walsh, were in the midst of the build of a young team that had missed finals for a couple of years in a row. This side was clinically skilled and had the endurance to grind out games, and in the wake of a new era, Adelaide had firmly placed themselves in it.
Our sports-loving nation has been left stunned and horrified by the murder of Adelaide Crows coach Phil Walsh.
Phil Walsh's death destroyed the football world for a period of time. The shocking nature of it and the circumstances surrounding reminded everyone that the AFL truly is just a game, and there's a lot of things that are bigger than it. But the profound impact that it can have on people, especially in difficult times, cannot be understated. The Crows rallied around caretaker coach Scott Camporelli and honoured the memory of Walsh to win 6 of their next 7, and then defeat the Bulldogs in a stunning elimination final before eventually caving to the premiers in Hawthorn. Former assistant Don Pike was hired as head coach leading into the 2016 season, and an expected period of adjustment was assumed. But Adelaide went 16-6, with Pike's flashy clean ball use style running rampant. They crunched the Kangaroos in an elimination final before dropping in another semi. But their true dominance was to be discovered the following year in 2017. The Crows had been building for a little while, and it all appeared to come to the forefront that year, as they never dropped below second spot for the entire duration of the season, finishing with a firm grasp of the minor premiership. It was during the final series for that year where they would employ their pre-game Power Rangers stance during the national anthem. This was a fascinating mental tactic, unlike anything ever seen before. The Crows players would stand apart from each other in a power pose, eyeballing a player from the opposition for the entire duration of the national anthem. Where most teams use that moment to absorb the atmosphere and demonstrate a unity within the team, Adelaide said nah, effectively implying that the national anthem was just a part of the process and that their focus was entirely on the football they were about to play. If it went wrong, they would have looked like dickheads, but it worked. Scarily well. They torched the star-studded GWS in the qualifying final by 6 goals before demolishing industry favourites Geelong in the prelim by a stupid 61 points, stamping themselves as favourites for a 3rd premiership. The stage was set. Nothing could go wrong. They couldn't be touched.
Back inside, here's an opportunity for Graham. Graham just goes bang! Look at this! The boot gave it off to Castagna. Right foot snap, got it! Goodness gracious me! We're going to win the premiership in 2017!
They got done by the banana jumper Tigers, the team that to that point had been the laughing stock of the comp for the last 20 years. At the time, no one knew what Richmond were going to become, and everyone thought this hilarious Tigers finals run that was giving some starved supporters a bit of joy would come to a rightful end on that Saturday, and the Crows got done. And here's where the story really starts.
It was a 5-day
It's been
training
an intriguing
camp,
year
but
for
its
Adelaide
legacy
Crows
has lasted
supporters. They were the team of last year. They had a bad grand final day, but it's fair to say there has been some drama.
What transpired in the pre-season of 2018 at the Adelaide Football Club was truly bigger than the AFL and created a spectacle, the mystery of which allowed for talk from the general Australian public. Often, there are occasions when AFL stories begin to affect people outside of the space of the on-field contest, an event that affects players as people, not just as athletes. Collective Mind is a mindset training company and brand that run a centre, publish books, and come into companies and organisations to influence and improve mental health and systems of well-being within the places they are hired. And after doing work with NRL teams and St Kilda in 2014, Adelaide hired them during the 2017 season with the aims of instilling a new mentality in the Crows team. They believe that mental complacency caused the choke in the 2017 grand final, and so in 2018 the football club began a pre-season like no other. And 3 years later, more than half their list had left and the club acquired its first wooden spoon. Even during the year, many could track that something happened on that camp that could link directly with the fall of a football club, but no one quite knew what it was. And after some investigation and a now silenced 2020 article, what allegedly went down at that camp is now more to light than ever before. So, what happened? Now, the word allegedly will be thrown around a fair bit during this video for reasons that will become clear later on. At the beginning of the camp, which took place on the Gold Coast, players were split into 3 different groups based on seniority at the club, with the oldest players being subjected to the most heinous practices. The senior group were allegedly driven blindfolded to the side of the camp by men armed with automatic weapons, later revealed to be fake. The exercises that the players were subjected to were rather absurd and later described as dangerous by sports psychologist Jeff Bond. There are instances of 100-metre sprints that were run by all players while the Richmond Club theme song blared over loudspeakers. There was supposedly a focus exercise involving staring into a teammate's eye for long periods of time in which player Tom Lynch collapsed and was reported to have been refused medical treatment until teammates intervened, allegedly demanding club doctor Mark Cesano, who was not at the camp, be brought along to see Lynch. Another exercise that was reported to have taken place was likened to commando military training, in which players would be tied to a tree, with the only method of freedom being a combat knife to which they would have to crawl to in order to cut themselves loose. On its own, this process doesn't seem too offensive. However, the teammates watching on were allegedly ordered to yell abuse at the player attempting to free themselves. Abuse which became deeply personal and player specific, based on information that the players later attested had to have been leaked to camp officials by Adelaide staff. Aside from the specific reported exercises that took place, other practices of the experience were also pretty peculiar. Players were asked to speak on their perceived weaknesses, but were only allowed to speak when in possession of the talking stick, which was an Aboriginal digging stick which at least 4 Indigenous players at the club noted to be culturally insensitive. Whenever travelling, players were asked to keep their heads down whilst loud music would play, and their social interactions with the outside world were supposedly nil, as their mobile phones were taken during the commencement of the program. This, in addition to the weird, under-duress vibes of the interviews they gave during the time the program was at the club.
Super important, I think, for our footy club and myself to be able to continue on the mind track.
And a player later opened up to the Herald Sun stating that players were told that they needed to be so tight with each other that they wouldn't have a problem if a fellow teammate slept with one of their wives. Yeah, pretty weird. Former Adelaide player Brett Burton, who was the football manager at the time, stated in the aftermath that he didn't regret the camp and that it would be laughed about later down the line. He clearly wasn't prepared for the effects that camp would have on the future of the club. But the camp strengthened their minds, right? They should be ready for the rigours of the year's play and ready to take their place at the top of the AFL after the failure from the year before.
Adelaide, the siren sounds, and there'll be no finals for the Adelaide Crows. They fall well short of last year when they played off in the grand final. There'll be spectators in September.
They didn't even make the finals. Their list remained effectively the same, and although they suffered plenty of injuries throughout the year, they couldn't come close to rediscovering their dominant form of the previous season. Questions quickly began to arise as to why Adelaide couldn't rediscover its play, and some player accounts quickly drew attention back to the camp at the start of the year. Notably was the internal cutting of all ties with the collective mind organisation by the Adelaide Football Club during the middle of the 2018 season. A report written by Mark Cesano was reviewed by the club, but no action was taken at the time. During the middle of that year, however, head coach Don Pike did admit that the camp was a failure.
It's fair to say that some of those sessions didn't hit the mark and didn't resonate with the players.
Were any players blindfolded?
Oh, there was blindfolding for a bus trip.
It's important we acknowledge we made some mistakes. That's what humans do. In our drive to improve, maybe we pushed too far, and that I regret.
Their intentions were good around it and genuine that it was going to help us, but it was obviously a disaster. And it affected players in different ways for different reasons. Yeah, I think the club have put their hand up and said it was a complete miss, and if we could do things differently, we would have. So, that obviously, the playing group lost a bit of trust with the footy department. And
Collective Mind had been a part of the Crows system during the 2017 season and leading into 2018 before finally being let go by the club. In that time, there were the public departures of Jake Lever and Charlie Cameron, both requesting a trade. And at the end of a poor 2018 season, Mitch McGovern requested a trade to Carlton. And in response to comments about him, McGovern's manager blamed the Adelaide Football Department and very specifically the pre-season camp as to why Mitch wanted to leave the club. Adelaide was in complete denial, and many sections of the Crows even today still maintain that the club just assumed a natural dip.
So the siren about to sound on the season for Adelaide.
But 2019 was just as bad, with the club finishing 11th. At the end of that year, a fresh wave of faces turned their backs on the former powerhouse. Alex Keith requested a trade to the Bulldogs. Josh Jenkins requested one to Geelong. The biggest fish of them all, Eddie Betts, decided he wanted to go back to Carlton, stating that the camp had made it really hard for him to enjoy footy. Cam Ellis-Yeoman signed with Brisbane. Hugh Greenwood requested a trade to the Gold Coast Suns of all places. Sam Jacobs requested a trade to GWS, and Tex Walker stepped down as captain. The following year saw Rory Atkins and Brad Crouch also elect to depart the club as the Crows picked up their first wooden spoon in history. And thus concluded the fall of the Adelaide Football Club, lost in hopelessness from then until this video is being made. An internal review led by Jason Dunstall at the end of the 2019 season saw head coach Don Pyke stand down and the removal of Brett Burton and Scott Camporelli. To this day, Adelaide has never made a public statement condemning the camp, although the AFL Integrity Unit has, stating it lacked due diligence. In 2020, Don Pyke actually called on Adelaide to address the camp officially once and for all in an effort to move on, but still maintained that the club's downward spiral couldn't be solely attributed to that pre-season.
And I think it's probably a conversation that's due with the club about, well, how do they wish to address this once and for all? And as I've said previously, the intention around that camp was very clear. The execution had some gaps and holes, and some mistakes were made, and that's been addressed. But I think there's also an issue at the moment with some context around some of the things that were done and the purpose behind those, which probably hasn't been tabled.
Anecdotally, however, the general consensus is that the Adelaide Football Club was ripped apart from the inside out based on this one stay in the Gold Coast, with nothing short of a mass exodus of players, the likes of which had never been seen before. And it will take the Crows years to recover. In part 2 of this video, we'll examine the Collective Mind side and how their views differ from what was put forward by the media, as well as Sam McClure's article and the subsequent lawsuit Collective Minds took out on Channel 9 and a number of journalists related to the issue. Thanks very much for watching, and I would appreciate it if you could go ahead and check out the music video for The Parlour by Willowbank Grove, which was shot by myself and a couple others over the course of 15 months. It would mean a lot if you could check it out. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.